Sorry about that. Esau sounds more like a Bigfoot to me. Hairy like a goat. Hairy from his head to his toes. Look at what a goat looks like. Doesn't sound like a human to me. Anyways, back to Strange Creatures from Time and Space by John A. Cale. And the hairy ones. Another kind of giant has seemingly always existed with us on this planet. He is shaped like a human being, but is covered with hair and prefers to live in the quiet, thinly populated forests of Canada. However, he is something of a vagabond and has frequently been seen all over the United States. Like most of our monsters, he has an uncanny ability to disappear in thin air as soon as the possessors begin to close in. I always say possesses instead of posse. I don't know why I do that. So once the posse begins to close in, I know why, but who wants to keep on hearing it? The natives of the far-off Himalayas are also very familiar with this creature. Long ago, named it Meto Kangmai. So Meto Kangmai, which means the evil smiling man of the snows. The British explorers took liberties with this phrase and dubbed the animal the Abominable Snowman, ABSM for short. There is now considerable evidence that the Abominable Snowman actually exists. What is more, there seems to be several different types of running rampant. They come in all sizes, ranging from stout three-footers, that's to giant hair-covered beasts 10 feet tall. Some of them seem to be directly related to unidentified flying objects. Others could be actually descendants of prehistoric Neanderthal man, like Hugh Troy's rhinoceros. They are fond of scattering their giant footprints around the countryside, leaving behind very small evidence of another kind. In the redwood forests of California, they have earned the nickname Bigfoot. The first published reference to the Himalayan's Abominable Snowman appeared in 1899 in a book titled Among the Himalayas by Major L.A. Waddell. He stated matter-of-factly that he had come across some giant man-looking tracks in the tiny kingdom of Sikkim, or Sikkim, something like that. Yeah, it's called Sikkim. In 1887, successive expeditions to those mountains reported regularly encountering similar tracks, and in several instances, large hair-covered personages. Generations of Type B scientists huddled comfortably amid their books on Ivy League campuses, scoffed at the reports and presented a wide range of speculations. It was only a bear or an ape, they announced periodically, and one group of scholars concluded that the tracks were spread by naked yogis wandering about the mountains into sub-zero temperatures. 3 years before Major Waddell found those footprints in Sikkim, an actual abominable snowman-type creature was reportedly captured in Canada, according to the Daily British Colonist, July 3rd, 1884. A group of railroad workers digging a tunnel outside of Yale, British Columbia, came upon what appeared at first to be a man sleeping on the tracks. It proved to be a hairy, half-man, half-beast, which was captured alive after a 5-minute chase. Jacko, as he was named by his captors, was 4 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 120 pounds. He has long, black, strong hair and resembles a human being with one exception. His entire body, excepting his hands and paws and feet, are covered with glossy hair 1 inch long. The account states his forearm is much longer than the man's forearm. What happened to Jacko is unknown. As recently as 1946, a Canadian reporter interviewed an elderly gentleman in Lytton, British Columbia, who claimed that he'd seen it. Others, including Mr. Alexander Caulfield Anderson of the Hudson Bay Company, claimed to have encountered these animals as early as 1864. The definitive work of Abominable Snowman legend came to life by Ivan T. Sanderson, delves into these early reports in detail and notes that many Indian legends and myths revolving around these creatures in North America. There are several old Indian tales about women being abducted by the Abominable Snowman and even having children with them. We might also mention that many other cultures have produced identical stories. Scholars may one day discover that man has frequently crossbred with these hairy beings throughout history. The Bible makes particular mention of this in Genesis 25, 19 through 34. Esau is described as being born red all over like a hairy garment. See? I told you, even he figured that out. He figured this out 50 years ago, and no one ever mentions it. And I have figured it out. I mentioned it, and it goes right over his head. Let's check if we can find this book out, because that would be an interesting read. For me, at least. Abominable Snow Fella Man. Legend come to life. My rent's going up, son of a gun. Got tantalized there for a little bit. Thought maybe it wasn't going to get maybe a way out of it, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. And we do got the book. And we're going to read that book. Why? Because it means something to me, because I've seen them. In the middle of my town, in northwest Ohio, where there's no reports of it. Until now. In fact, I had 2 close encounters and had numerous sightings. Tree structures. There's a TB structure literally 350 yards from where I'm sitting right now. I'm pointing in the wrong direction. Going due east. Early European literature contains numerous references to the wild man of the woods. we were supposed to have who were supposed to have existed hidden away in the dense forests of England, France, and Germany, and many other countries. They were described as tall, hairy-covered men of remarkable agility, able to leap vast distances and outrun ordinary men. In Irish folklore, according to the bestiary, those hominins, Sylvestris, I guess it's how hominin, or hominine, I guess it's hominin, or it could be hominine, Sylvestris, used to inhabit inelegant subterranean hollows, living on vegetables, and refused to have anything to do with other humans. However kindly they were treated, it was impossible to civilize them because they refused to recognize law and order. There were an almost infinite number of them in Ireland. Ireland has a lot of strange things happening in there. Actually, there's Damien, he's filming stuff all the time in Ireland, but no one ever pays attention to that dude, except for a few of us who realize he's filming stuff. But it doesn't add up to what they say Sasquatch is, because I think there's some kind of ultra-dimensional being myself, but whatever that exactly means is beyond my comprehension. But if I know one thing, I seen him go through a tree. That's right, not around a tree, through a tree, and he didn't break a damn branch. Not a thing. And I don't expect you to believe me until you see it yourself. In the early literature, the European wild man purportedly had a lustful nature and would accost lone human females passing through the forest, forcibly engaging them in sexual intercourse. Perhaps these tales are the basis for the sitar legends, and the artists of Playboy cartoonists have misrepresented sitars by giving them cloven hoofs. Since the American Indians have similar stories, it is possible that there is some fact to the tales. Isolated tribes in South America also have legends of racial intermixing with hairy ones. Some non-scientific speculators have even suggested that the creatures can only reproduce through human females. However, we have yet to uncover a claim that anyone was raped by the hairy monster. Although if such claims were ever made, it is unlikely that they would get into print. Even more incredible is this steadily accumulating evidence which strongly suggests that the hairy ABSMs are connected in some peculiar way with the phenomenon of unidentified flying objects. You always see orbs around them, one way or the other. We will examine this material in another chapter. The funny flying saucers have produced all kinds of intriguing monster reports, and we were not being entirely I can't say it. Facetious, sorry. Ah, God, I wish my tongue and mouth would work. Facetious, when we produced in chapter 6 that the Patagonian giant might have been transplanted in Michigan in 1897. It almost seems as if anomalous earthly creatures have somehow been enlisted or drafted into service by the saucers to carry out some mysterious missions. The UFO evidence, which is now almost overwhelming, indicates that the entire flying saucer phenomenon is an outrageous enterprise that preys upon our gullibility and is meant to inspire a totally false belief in extraterrestrial or interplanetary visitants. He does have a great way with language and English language. I wish I could write like him. One of America's leading ufologists, a Brad Steiger, author of many books on the subject, Mr. Steiger has received an astonishing journal from James C. Wyatt of Memphis, Tennessee. The journal was purportedly written by Mr. Wyatt's grandfather and discusses in detail an experience with a crazy bear in the year 1888. An Indian is supposed to have led Grandfather Wyatt to a hidden cave in Tennessee where a hairy man-like creature was concealed. The Indians fed the crazy bear at regular intervals, asserting that such creatures were injected from moons. That's what it says, which landed periodically in the valley. Moons, orbs, UFOs. The Indians told him that over the years there had been many crazy bears left in the woods, and many of their people had seen the Sky Man put their crazy bears out of their moons. So there is one solution to our mystery. The flying saucers are dumping hairy monsters all over the landscape. Wyatt's crazy bear is described as a short-necked, long-armed creature covered with glossy black hair. It is a curious fact that flying saucers have been repeatedly seen in ABSM-infested territories. A mountain climbing expedition to Everest in 1923 and 24, headed by General Bruce. What a nice name. Bronson's a good name too, by the way. Not only came across the classic giant footprints of the abominable snowman, but also reportedly saw a great hairy naked man running across the snowfield below at around 17,000 feet. Subsequent expeditions had further encounters with the creature. During the 1933 Everest attempt, mountaineer F.S. Smythe, or Smith, depending on how you wrote it. I go Smythe, was climbing alone when he observed two curious-looking objects floating in the sky. They hovered motionless and seemed to pulse slowly. Other Himalayan expeditions in the 1920s and 30s reported variously seeing giant silver discs and a flying teacup. The UFO controversy did not exist in those days, so most Type B scientists regarded these stories as hallucinations created by the high altitude. Although the natives had plenty to say about the ABSM or Yeti, they shrugged off the aerial objects as religious manifestations. The discs had always flown regular routes over the mountains. They belonged there like the clouds. The natives explained the early explorers. We visited India and the Himalayas in the 1950 through 56 and heard many Yeti stories from the natives. These mysterious animals are an accepted fact in the lives of the mountain people in the same way that deer are an accepted fact to us. At the time of our visit, only about 400 white men had visited those regions in all of history. Most of these had been religious missionaries, more intent on saving souls than chasing monsters. In many remote villages, we were the very first white men ever to be seen by the natives. Since then, the tiny mountain kingdoms of Nepal and Bhutan and Sikkim have been opened up to limited tourism, but the Red Chinese have occupied Tibet completely, driving out the Dalai Lama and his followers. It sealed off the mountain pass with troops and fortifications. It is virtually impossible to obtain an accurate map of the Himalayan territories. The area is strategically important to India and would be easier to get a map of an atomic installation at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. In some places, the Yeti is greatly feared, and there are numerous accounts of animals attacking and killing human beings. In 1949, a Sherpa herdsman named Lekpa Tensing was reportedly torn apart by a Yeti in the bleak pass of Naga Parbat, one of the highest passages in the world, far beyond the reach of ordinary animals. Mountain mothers deal with their misbehaving children by warning that the Yeti will get them if they don't watch out. Hill farmers in some areas are afraid to work after dark because of the curtain of the superstition and fear. They believe that to look at a Yeti means death, and only protection is to cover your eyes and run downhill. The Yeti's feet are supposed to be mounted backwards to facilitate mountain climbing, but that makes things damn awkward when it tries to run downhill. This odd belief springs from an incident that allegedly happened back in the early 1900s when the English were stretching a telegraph line from Kalimpong, India to the Hasa, I don't know how to pronounce it, the Hasa, Tibet. It was a big job, and many hillmen were required to work on it. Some of them were encamped at Bethang, I guess that's what it is, 3 miles from Jalep La Pass, one of the gateways to Tibet. One morning, a dozen workers went out and failed to return. The next morning, a squad of British soldiers went out to search for them. They found instead a strange animal hiding under some giant boulders and the approaches to the pass. They shot at it and dragged it to the nearest dank bungalow huts maintained for travelers. Later, Sir Charles Bell, then the British political officer of Sikkim, came and ordered the carcass packed and shipped away, supposedly to England. It was never seen again, and there is no trace of it. This story has been lovingly repeated in several Indian books on mountain lore, but it seems to be based more on a hearsay than fact. There is no mention of it in Sir Charles' papers. However, an old man in Darjeeling, Bamba Hardar Chitrai, I don't know if I say these names right, claims he saw it with his own eyes when he was a boy. He describes it as being 10 feet tall and covered with shaggy hairs, 2 or 3 inches long. Its gruesome face was hairless, set with a mouthful of sharp yellow fangs and cold red eyes. Its feet were backwards, he said, but this could be a false impression depending on how the carcass was lying. Its feet had been hand-like. Its feet could have been hand-like, like an ape's hanging down over the edge of a table. Okay? And it is significant that the snowman legend persists throughout the Himalayan range from Kashmir in the east to Assam far to the west. Every tribe has stories about the creature. Every mountain language, there are many, has a word for it. All of these stories contain essentially the same details, and the basic descriptions are universally agreed upon. There are two main types. One is about 4 feet tall and resembles a human dwarf covered with hair, and the other is very tall, frequently reported to be from 7 to 10 feet. Neither resembles a bear or ape. Bears move about on all fours most of the time, except when attacking. As for gorillas, anthropologists estimate that the total world gorilla population is around 400, and they are found only in a small area deep within the equatorial Africa. Animals answering to the descriptions of the two Himalayan Yetis types have reportedly been seen near grounded flying saucers in South America and even in France. They will be discussed in another chapter. Tenzing Norgay, a Sherpa, who, together with Sir Edmund Hillary, was the first to reach the summit of Mount Everest on May 29, 1953, lives in a picturesque mountain village of Darjeeling, India, in the Himalayan foothills. We were able to spend a considerable amount of time with this remarkably simple and humble man during our visit to the region. Tenzing liked to tell about his brother-in-law who was once an assistant to the great Sangay Rinpoche, anyway, I don't know, and the late Grand Lama of the Rungbuk Monastery on this steep approach to Everest. He went with the Grand Lama on his annual treks to meditate in the high secret holy places of the mountains. During one of these trips, another assistant Lama found a dead Yeti and presented the skin to Sangay Rinpoche. I don't know. It looked like the skin of a young bear, and the Grand Lama used it for years to sit on while meditating. It was probably placed in his croton after his death. What is a croton? Croton. Short croton. I don't know what a croton is. Many of the mountain emissaries cherish bits of Yeti hair and bones as sacred relics. They think Yetis are devils posted around the mountains to guard the gods who supposedly live on the summits. In the fall of 1954, a tribe of headhunters in Assam reportedly killed and ate a creature 10 feet tall. The bones and fur were supposed to have been carried off to a monastery. Tenzing has never seen a Yeti personally, but he does not question it exists. His father claims to have once met one face to face and managed to escape. Tenzing said his father wasn't a liar or given to making up wild tales, and his description correlates with the reports of other eyewitnesses. Almost every expedition into the more remote sectors of the Himalayas in the past 50 years has seen and photographed the huge abominable snowman footprints. Usually such prints are found in the snow at high altitudes, which are beyond the reach of most ordinary animals. After all, animals are not likely to venture into areas where no food or prey can exist. Samples of Yeti droppings have also been collected and studied and indicate that it lives on a small rodent known as the mouse hare. A number of expeditions have produced reliable reports of having seen the beast itself from a distance. It has been seen digging up roots with a stick, and something no ordinary animal would do. This use of a tool puts it in a subhuman class. What could it be? There is some evidence that it might actually be a survivor of the early Neanderthal man. Footprints known to have been made by Neanderthalers, that's what he says, have been discovered, and they are almost identical to ABSM tracks. In 1948, an ancient cave, long sealed by volcanic lava, was opened near Torano, Italy. So, Torino, I don't know to say Torino, Italy. It was found to contain all kinds of interesting artifacts, including the footprints of modern-type men, giant bears, and Neanderthalers. The later tracks were immediately recognized as being almost exactly the same as the footprints photographed by the various expeditions to Everest. Of equal interest was the fact that the discovery seemed to indicate that modern man and Neanderthalers existed in the same area, a fact which led the type B scientists to quickly scuffle the discovery into the back of their files. Did I say scuffle? I meant to say shuffle the discovery back into their files. In 1950s, an expedition in the Middle East unearthed relics which suggested that modern man, Cro-Magnon man, and Neanderthal man had all existed at the same time. This too was quickly swept under the carpet by pro-evolution types. After all, if these various human and subhuman personages all lived together in a single epoch, then there is something radically wrong with our long accepted evolutionary scale. Esau and Jacob, that's what the story is about. The evidence we are summarizing here opens a whole new anthropological bag. Could the wild men of the woods of Europe have been stray survivors of some ancient time gradually driven further and further back into the forest and the mountains, forced to mate with human females in order to survive at all, and finally pressed into extinction when human females were no longer readily accessible. Could these hairy beings have survived in the remote fastness of the Himalayas and the deep jungles of Brazil and northern Canada? I wonder if you meant fastness. Or vastness. Anyways, maybe it was a misspelling. We have seen the Yeti footprints for ourselves. We have even tried to track the animal down to its lair. In Jadoo, this adventure was fully described. Here is a summary of that narrative. While traveling through northern Sikkim with a native guide named Norbhu, we heard the Yeti's distinctive call, which sounded like a bird very near, short chirps with a slight warble, similar to monkey chatter, but higher pitched and less defined. We were very close to the border of Tibet and soon found definite Yeti tracks. The tracks were clear and spaced at a leisurely pace. It was definitely not a ape or bear, and the prints were much too big to have been made by a barefooted man. Then suddenly, from somewhere in front of us, there was a sharp animal scream, brief and filled with tearing pain. Norbhu jumped a foot. Then there was only silence and the drip of water on the leaves overhead. A little further, a group of natives appeared and led us to their village on the brink of a narrow river. They heard the scream too. It was a panther, they said, not a dying panther. A dying panther. They had found a bloody spot surrounded by Yeti tracks. They were rushing back to their village when they bumped into us. Could a Yeti kill a panther? I asked. It was one of the few things that could. Norbhu turned back to Dubdi, and I proceeded alone. The trail was easy to follow, too easy. The Yeti was more agile and faster than a plundering white man. True to what the llamas had told me repeatedly, the Yeti was picking the easiest route to wherever it was going, avoiding more difficult jungle areas, picking the shallowest spots in rivers, etc. Sometimes it seemed as if I were right on top of him. Other times I seemed to have no chance of finding it. I found villages and lamaseries in a state of alert and fear after having heard and seen my prey. All the descriptions were the same. It was 3 foot taller than myself. I'm 6 foot 2 inches and covered with brown hair, with a hairless red face and a head that sloped up to a slight point. At a monastery above a Chang Thang, the llamas were beating drums and blowing trumpets when I arrived. They'd seen the Yeti only a few hours before, running along a trail I was following. Following the hot and cold Yeti trail, I arrived at last to the northern village of Lachin, 8,800 feet above sea level. Wow. Where the natives grabbed me excitedly and led me through the tortuous passes of a marsh. My Yeti, no doubt, had been seen there by a group of children that very morning. The place was crawling with tracks. As I stood there looking down at them, an eerie screech drifted down from the jutting rocks nearby. The effect on the natives was electric. They were stunned and frightened. Only my presence kept them from running. They watched me with alarmed curiosity, wondering what I was going to do. I was wondering too. Cautiously I moved forward, staggering up an inclined path strewn with giant boulders. Finally, I emerged onto an edge of a sweeping cavity filled with water, where broken trees and decayed bushes poked up like skeletons. That was where I saw it. Maybe it wasn't a Yeti. I wasn't close enough to be absolutely sure, but something was out there across the lake, something big, breathtakingly big, brown and moving swiftly, splashing through the shallow icy waters towards a pile of boulders. As it neared them, another brown blur moved out to meet it, and together they disappeared beyond the debris of the landfall. I circled the lake and headed cautiously up through the rocks and landfalls. In a few minutes I came to a narrow channel in the cliffs. Suddenly a high-pitched Yeti call sounded again and I froze. I was coming from the cliffs overhead. The Yetis were up there somewhere watching me, jeering me. I hugged the side of the canal and looked up. High above me there was a quick movement, a flash of brown against the gray sky. The Yetis must have climbed straight up the sheer face of the cliffs, something no bear or ape could easily do. I know I couldn't climb those cliffs. I knew I couldn't climb those cliffs. I knew I couldn't get near those clever, elusive animals alone. I stood there tensely for a long time, then I slowly backed out of the canal. That was as close as I ever got to an abominable snowman. Well, that's pretty good, buddy. Good job. The most recent appearance of an abominable footprint was in March 1969. Mr. Charles Lutch, I think it's Lutch, a mountaineer from Center Point, New York, was trekking through Nepal when he came across a set of tracks in the snow at 12,000 feet. They were 4 inches wide, 7 inches long, and seemed to have a middle toe slightly longer than the other four. The tracks extended for about 100 feet, leading into an underbrush and ignoring a nearby open path. Nice. That was a nice, pleasant surprise. I heard about that in his story, but I didn't know about it until now. Mr. Keel, wherever you are, and the next phase of life, good job. Very impressive. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, pity the poor Yeti. He doesn't exist, but he doesn't have enough brains to realize it. The mystery of the giant footprints have been solved many times by many Type B scientists. Back in 1958, a Wire story quoted an anthropologist from Johns Hopkins University explaining that the Yeti footprints were made by natives wearing sandals with their big toes sticking out. The natives of the Himalayas apparently never read the story, and so they continue to wear heavy boots when they are wading around in the mountain snows. Somebody is always shooting at these hairy illusions. There are a number of documented accounts of the creatures having been shot dead or captured, dying slowly in captivity. The real myth seems to be a scientific allegation that the abominable snowman does not exist, has never existed, and it cannot possibly exist. China has produced a considerable amount of ABSM lore, and a good part of it correlates favorably with the material from the Himalayas and even from Canada. One story relates how a group of Chinese hunters came upon an abominable snowman in 1913, shot and wounded it, carrying it triumphantly to Patang, I don't know how you pronounce it, in Xinjiang province, I guess I should pronounce it, where it survived for some months. The late Frank Edwards described it in Stranger Than Science as a creature with a black monkey-like face covered with silvery yellow hair several inches long. It had exceptionally powerful hands and had feet much like those of a human rather than an ape. It grunted and made guttural sounds, but spent most of his time pursing its lips and making loud whistling noises. Stranger Than Science. It's blinded me with science. Let's see if I can find it. I don't know if I'll be able to, but we can try. We get a few good hits, especially when you read like Keel's work and Stranger. There it is, Edward Fangs. You see what it looks like. Well, you got a good hit there, positive hit. Good. I have so many books to read. Some I might as well do it. I can't think of anything else better to do right now except read. Maybe play my guitar and start doing my art. I can write my book still. I was gonna get that. I would like to get to. I'd like to get to 40,000 words by December. So that would make my book pretty much halfway there. We see 4,000 words is 4 pages. It's 10,000 words would be 40 pages. And it's 80,000 words would be 80 pages. Did I get that right? Did I just do my math right? So it's about 250 words a page. So yeah, 4 pages are 1,000 words. So then 10,000 would make that 40. And then, so 20 would then make 80 pages. So 80,000 words would be 160 pages. And that would make me halfway through writing my book. My own Fortean anomalous journey into the abyss and to nowhere and back. It's from feel like I'm a ping pong going back and forth. One mystery after another, right? But life without mystery is mysteriously lacking any interestingness about it. I just lost it. Anyways. And stranger than science, as a creature with black monkey-like face covered with silvery yellow hair, several inches long. It had exceptionally powerful hands and feet, much like those of a human rather than an ape. It grunted and made gruntle sounds, but spent most of its time pursing its lips and making loud whistling noises. In 1954, a Chinese official in the Yunnan province told some visiting Russians, a Bigfoot, that a hairy-covered race of subhumans thrived in the mountains in western Yunnan. One of them had even been captured a few years earlier and brought to Kunming. The Chinese call them Jinsung, or bear men. And other regions, the Chinese speak of giant hairy animals known locally as Kradan or Bikbak. It is well known to tribes of the Gobi Desert, and the people of the Mongolia, that makes sense, and the ancient Chinese literature frequently alludes to these hairy mountain men. It would take a book twice the length of this one just to list the many available literary references, explorers and expeditions to those far corners have returned with a wealth of information about these fascinating animals, and numerous accounts and descriptions have been published in random scientific journals over the years. With the exception of the European stories and some of those reports from Canada, it seems that the majority of these creatures are accompanied by a pungent and very unpleasant odor. This stink seems to exceed normal animal smells and could eventually offer some kind of clue to the body chemistry of the creatures. For now, we can only conclude that the abominable snowman is using the wrong kind of soap. North of Tibet and west of China, the Soviet Union has several isolated pockets where ABSM types seem to abound. Russians scientists have long had a special interest in the Yeti and have periodically sent out expeditions to try to learn more about them. A number of well-documented reports have come from Russia and have been collected and translated by Ivan T. Sanderson. A good part of the Yeti literature in the United States is based entirely upon Mr. Sanderson's research and writings, usually without mentioning his name at all. We are therefore going to give Mr. Sanderson full credit before we proceed to steal some choice items from his work. And Abominable Snowman Men Legend Come to Life, Sanderson deals at length with the geographical distribution of the Abominable Snowman stories and points out how unlikely it is for separate isolated cultures to come up with identical details unless there was some definite truth underlying those details. Tribes speak entirely different languages and remaining almost completely isolated from other tribes of their own race have managed to produce identical ABSM data. Even in the United States, where general communications are superb in comparison to the remote fastness of Tibet in China, the many annual encounters with ABSM types rarely receive any publicity beyond the areas where they occurred. Monster stories like flying saucer tales are human interest items and rarely receive much notice in the national press. This dearth of published reports is in our favor since few witnesses have even heard of these things before their own encounter, while most Americans have now read random superficial items about both Yetis and UFOs. They have not been exposed to the information necessary for the construction of a convincing false report. The Soviets could conceivably capture a whole tribe of Yetis, and we might never know it until they put them on display at the next World Fair. Material published in the Russian language rarely filters down to American monster buffs. Whole states in the United States have been thrown into uproar over monster mania in recent years, with armies of armed men and police dogs and helicopters searching hundreds of square miles in vain efforts to locate unbelievable creatures which were reportedly slaughtering domestic animals and terrifying farmers. But what causes headlines in the newspapers is in one state is often ignored altogether in the press of adjoining states. News of these monster panics rarely appear in the New York Times or Time or Newsweek. We live in a world so filled with hard news of war and disaster that these more unusual events are reduced to the status of fillers and human interest items. Collectors of esoterica tend to regard all this as some form of sinister censorship and circulate wild stories about how the government suppresses the news of such events. In countries such as the Soviet Union, where the press really is controlled and censored by the government, it is here too. You have to get honest about it, that's all. There are certain to be even fewer published reports. There lives in Moscow today a scientist by the name of V.A. Chokalov Sanderson, writes, who in 1913 submitted a full detailed report on the East Asiatic abominable snowmen to the Russian Imperial Academy of Sciences. This priceless material was shelved and was denied funds to continue his field investigations, and he was frankly told to shut up. Yeah, and that doesn't happen here. In most recent years, some maverick Russian scientists have begun to take a more open interest in abominable snowman mystery, and a few papers on the subject have been circulated in limited numbers. A geologist named B.M. Zordarek claims that he stumbled upon a sleeping creature in 1934 while trekking along the Darwez Ridge in the Pamirs? P-A-M-I-R-S. He was about 1.5 meters in length, approximately 4 feet 10 inches. Zordek reported The head and the forward limbs could not be seen because they were hidden by the growth of wild oaks. The legs, however, could be seen, and they had black nailed soles and were too long and graceful to have belonged to a bear. His back was also too flat to be a bear's. The whole body of this animal was covered with fur, more like the fur of a yak, that's right, or a wild goat, like it talks about in the story of Esau. Then the rich fur of a bear. The color of the fur was grayish brown, somewhat more prominent brown than a bear's. His guide was badly frightened by the sight, and two men did not stay to study the creature more closely. Legend of these and the two men did not stay to study the creature more closely. Legends of these creatures abound throughout Palmar mountain range. A man in Teb is supposed to have wrestled with one of them in 1939. He was out hunting around 4 p.m. when the animal sprang at him. Now this hunter wrestled with Ghoul Bayavan. The story goes, the Ghoul Bayavan was covered with short, soft wool. The man could not get hold of any. On the face of the man there was also short wool, and there was a terrible odor coming from him. Finally, the hunter was able to throw the Ghoul Bayavan to the ground, but at the same time he lost consciousness himself. The villagers came upon him and brought him home. The ground around him bore evidence of this wrestling match. While camping near the head of Jermont River in the Soviet Union, Professor V.K. Leontiev reportedly obtained a brief glimpse of the Yeti type. It was in August 1957, and the professor's adventure began when he heard an unusual cry. It wasn't like the yell of an animal. Not a wild mammal or bird known to me could make such a sound, yet it couldn't be a human being either. The professor wrote, shortly afterwards he saw something moving across the field of snow about 150 feet away. That's nothing. That's hardly any. 150. That's only 50 yards away. That's half a football field. He was walking on his feet, not touching the ground with his hands. Leontiev continued, his shoulders were unusually wide. His body was covered with long dark hair. He was about 2.2 meters, about 7 feet tall. The professor said he picked up his rifle and fired at the being. At the sound of the shot, the creature took off at incredible speed and disappeared in some high rocks. Beyond the snowfield, large footprints were left behind. The Russian Information Service supplied Mr. Sanders with a translation of the following testimony from Lieutenant Colonel V.S. Karapetyan of the Medical Service in the Soviet Army. From October to December 1941, our infantry battalion was stationed some 30 kilometers from the town of Bunetsk in the Dagestan ASSR. One day, the representatives of the local authorities asked me to examine a man caught in the surrounding mountains and brought to the district center. My medical advice was needed to establish whether or not this curious creature was a disguised spy. I entered a shed with two members of the local authorities when I asked why I had to examine the man in a cold shed and not in a warm room. I was told that the prisoner could not be kept in the warm room. He had sweated in the house so profusely that they had to keep him in the shed. I can still see the creature as it stood before me, a male, naked, barefooted. It was doubtlessly a man because its entire shape was human. The chest and back and shoulders, however, were covered with shaggy hair of a dark brown color. This fur of his was much like that of a bear. The 2 or 3 centimeters long, the fur was thinner and softer below the chest. His wrists were crude and sparsely covered with hair. The palms of his hands and soles of his feet were free of hair, but the hair on his head reached to his shoulders, partly covering his forehead. The hair on his head, moreover, felt very rough to the hand. He had no beard or mustache, though his face was completely covered in a light growth of hair. The hair around his mouth was also short and sparse. The man stood absolutely straight with his arms hanging, and his height was above the average, about 180 centimeters, about 70 inches. 70 inches would be, 6 inches. He wasn't even 6 feet, not that big, was he? He stood before me like a giant. Well, I mean, 70 inches, not that big, though. I mean, 12 inches, 5 inches would be, 5 feet, excuse me. That'd be 60 inches. So that wouldn't even be 6 feet. But I guess he must have been bigger than otherwise, I guess. On the whole, he was considerably bigger than any of the local inhabitants. He stood before me like a giant, his mighty chest thrust forward, his fingers were thick, strong, and exceptionally large. On the whole, he was considerably bigger than any of the local inhabitants. His eyes told me nothing. They were dull and empty, the eyes of an animal. He seemed to me like an animal and nothing more. As I learned, he had accepted no food or drink since he was caught. He had asked for nothing and said nothing. When kept in a warm room, he sweat profusely. While I was there, some water and then some bread were brought up to his mouth, and someone offered him a hand, but there was no reaction. I gave a verbal conclusion that this was no disguised person, but a wild man of some kind. Then I returned to my unit and never heard of him again. Since Colonel Karapetyan makes no mention of the man's odor, and despite his sweating, we assume he was not a member of the smelly variety. There are many other Soviet accounts of captured Yeti types. Some are at great variances with others. Professor Hawkilov's 1913 report contains several of these cases. He describes, for example, how a group of herdsmen captured one of the creatures in the mountains of Iran Kabrg. This was one of the shorties. Kalov wrote, "The wild man was a male below average height, covered with hair like a young camel. He had long arms and far below his knees. Stooped with shoulders hunched forward, his chest was flat and narrow, his forehead sloping over the eyes with prominently arched brows. Lower jaw was massive, without any chin. Nose was small with large nostrils. The ears were large without any lobes, pointed back, and on the back of his neck there was a rise. The skin on the forehead, elbows, and knees hard and tough. When he was captured, he was standing with his legs spread, slightly bent in the knees. When he was running, he was spreading his feet wide apart, awkwardly swinging his arms. The instep of the wild man resembled a human, but at least twice the size, with widely separated toes. The large toe being shorter than that of a human's and widely separated from the others. The arms with the full fingers was like a human arm, yet different. When the wild man, at the instance of the herders, was allowed to go free, two men followed him to discover the place where he vanished, and an indentation under a hanging rock, strewn with high grass. The local residents offered additional information about these creatures, that they lived in pairs, seldom seen by people, and not at all dangerous to humans. The second witness stated that for several months he observed a wild man in the regions of the river of Manas, or Dam. This creature of the female sex was something chained to a small mill, but was also allowed to go free. The general description was the same as the male: hairy, covered of skin, stooped, narrow chest, shoulders were inclined forward, long arms, bent knees, flat insteps, spread out toes resembling a paw. The contact with the ground flat without the instep. The head is described in the same fashion, absent of a chin and the rise in the back. This creature seldom issued any sounds and usually was quiet and silent. Only when approached she bared her teeth and screeched. She had a peculiar way of lying down or sleeping like a camel by squatting on the ground on its knees and elbows, resting the forehead on the ground, the resting of the wrists on the back of the head. This position accounts for the unusual hard skin of the elbows and knees, like camel soles. When offered food, the female ate only raw meat, some vegetables, and grain. She did not touch cooked meat and bread, although later she was getting used to the bread. Sometimes she would catch and eat some insects. She would drink in animal fashion by lapping water, or sometimes she would dip her arm in water and lick the water. When she was allowed to go free, she ran awkwardly. Swinging her arms to the nearby reeds where she disappeared. Some of the details in this account will turn up again in this book, and other monster reports viewed in an entirely different context. The long fingers are common in many of the descriptions of the flying saucer pilots, which we will examine further on. Some of the hairy creatures running around the United States seem to conform to these general descriptions from the Soviet Union. Ivan Sanderson's book Abominable Snowman and Legend Come to Life is over 500 pages. It is? Did I see that? It was 500 pages? Maybe I got the wrong. Is there a different copy? Huh. Well, the one that I'm looking at only has 300 pages. 370 pages. Oh well, this is not that important. 500 pages long and carefully presented all sides of the question. Obviously, we cannot even begin to reduce such a complicated subject to a few pages here. Sanderson has attempted to catalog all the known abominable snowman lore from many scattered geographical locations. After many years of investigation and study, he concludes, I think there are at least three main types of ultra-primitive men and or submen, and or subhumanoids still alive today. These, I would say, are first sundry pygmy types of very near human or completely human composition. Second, some remaining Neanderthaler type types in eastern Eurasia. The third, some very primitive and large creatures, almost absolutely without any culture in any sense of the term, in the northwestern, North and Central America, perhaps in South America, the eastern Sino-Tibetan uplands, and in Indochina. Then I am even more sure that there still remains something else. We agree, there still remains something else. Big feet, little brains. Big feet and little brains. Vancouver Island, British Columbia, while he's just across the Canadian border. North of Seattle, Washington, unidentified hairy beings live there. The Indians have always insisted that the heavily forested sections of the island were inhabited by wild men of the woods. A lumberman named Mike King reported stumbling across one of the creatures in 1901. He said he saw it squatting by a creek, carefully washing off some roots and snatching them into neat piles. Stacking them in two neat piles. He started to raise his rifle, but felt that he was looking at something human, too human to be shot at, even though it was large and covered with reddish-brown fur. It finally jumped up and ran off like a man. His arms were peculiarly long and using freely and climbing and bush running. Mr. King observed that after the thing had departed, King went down to the creek and looked at its tracks. He saw evidence of a human foot, but with phenomenally long and spreading toes. British Columbia has produced many abominable snowmen reports. up in Canada, the thing is called by the old Indian name Sasquatch. Even Theodore Roosevelt, the great outdoorsman who later became president, recorded a hairy monster story in a book he published in 1893, Wilderness Hunter. Roosevelt repeated a tale told to him by a trapper named Bauman. Essentially, Bauman and another man had been camping at the head of Wisdom River with something tall, when something tall walking on two legs had invaded their camp and smashed their gear. At night they could hear a harsh, grating, long-drawn moan, a peculiarly sinister sound. Bauman left the camp one day, and when he returned he found his friend dead. The body was still warm, Roosevelt wrote, but the neck was broken, while there were 4 great fang marks in the throat, the footprints of the unknown beast creature printed deep in the soft soil, told the whole story. It had not eaten the body, but apparently had romped and gambled around in an uncouth, fierce glee, occasionally rolling over and over it, and had then fled back into the soundless depths of the woods. And I sure heard somebody else. Burn Eye, Third Eye Science guy said he heard something similar to that when he was out there in that neck of the woods. An interesting story. I would love to have him come on. Fortunately, there aren't any too many stories of witnesses suffering physical harm from their meeting with the hairy people, but there are too many to ignore. In the next chapter, we will summarize a large number of North American sightings, including incidents involving attacks and injuries. In 1965, John W. Green, editor of the Agassiz, maybe that's what it is, British Columbia Advance, compiled a list of 120 Sasquatch incidents ranging from sightings and attacks to the discovery of tracks and various strange occurrences. In 1942, according to Green, a man named Katz, with a K and a Z, in British Columbia, had his arm broken by the hairy giant while picking berries. Going further back, there was a story of 2 mountain hunters in British Columbia had been killed by something that walked on 2 legs, and in the early 1800s. Back in 1907, Indians at Bishop Cove, British Columbia, were reportedly terrified by a monkey-like wild man that dug clams at night and howled. In 1945, a hairy giant chased one Henry Charlie for nearly a mile near Harrison Mills, British Columbia. Another man of our monster hunting brigade, Lee Trippett, an electronics engineer in Eugene, Oregon, has collected 41 ABSM incidences from the state of Washington, Oregon, and California alone. In California, the creature has been dubbed Bigfoot for obvious reasons. So right there we have 160 events. Obviously we cannot list them all. And the columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, George Draper, has written many articles about Bigfoot. He, too, has come up with More items for our grotesque glossary. Still another researcher, Roger Patterson of Yakima, Washington, has built up an enormous file of little-known sightings and has acquired a collection of plaster casts of Bigfoot footprints, other kinds of tangible evidence, including photographs. An anthropologist in Illinois, Lauren Coleman, has yet another collection of reports. The mass evidence contains all kinds of oddities, such as the following letters written by Katz, British Columbia, on April 23, 1957, by someone who signed the name Mary Jo. The letter was mailed to the village clerk at Harrison Hot Springs in the heart of Sasquatch country. It was written in crude, almost illiterate style, apparently the work of an Indian lady. She says, in part, 15 years ago my old daddy was hurt bad by Sasquatch man he met a mile from Katz. One thing, my daddy was good Catholic and a very little drink liquor, I guess that's what it's supposed to be. What happens, he says, was daddy was with mama picking berries when he went away from the others for a rest. He says he only looked at trees and sky. Then big man over 6 foot came running from rocks at him. Hit old daddy on the ground. It hit him on the head and side arm. Hit him hard and make grunts. Daddy yelled, then others come and Sasquatch run away fast. They see Sasquatch running and daddy blood on his head. Grandma says Sasquatch, big nice man, is catch little Indian woman for make love to all they want. Old daddy, scared of the woods after, never go anywhere, just stay home. What intrigues us the most about the above is Mary Jo's repetition of what her grandmother had told her. Sasquatch, big nice man, is catch little Indian women for make love all the way they want. Biologists argue that one species cannot successfully mate and produce offspring with another, but we cannot say with certainty that the ABSM types are not at least partially human. They are different, to be sure, but are they totally non-human? Could there be some element of truth to the ancient legends from other lands that the wild men of the woods kidnap human females and indulge in scandalous hanky-panky? One flaw to this admittedly sensational speculation is the fact that the female Sasquatch has been observed on a number of occasions, or at least hairy humanoids with pedulant breasts have been seen, and it is generally assumed that they were female. Since the animals are naked, witnesses who have been close enough to notice have reported upon their obvious masculinity, or in the cases of apparent females, their lack of it. It is a notarized affidavit signed on August 26, 1957, William Rowe stated, "My first impression was of a huge man about 6 feet tall, almost 3 feet wide, and probably weighing somewhere near 300 pounds. It was covered from head to foot with dark brown silvery tipped hair. But as it came closer, I saw its breast, that was a female, that it was a female, and yet its torso was not curved like a female's. Its broad frame was straight from shoulders to hip. The arms were much thicker than a man's arms and longer, reaching almost to his knees. Its feet were broader proportionally than a man's, about 5 inches wide in the front and tapering to much thinner heels. When it walked, it placed its heels of its foot down first. I could see the gray-brown skin and the hide of the soles of its feet. The head was higher at the back than at the front. The nose was broad and flat. The lips and chin protruded further than its nose, but the hair that covered it, leaving bare only parts of its face around the mouth, nose, and ears, made it resemble an animal as much as a human. None of this hair, even on the back of its head, was longer than an inch. Really. Then on its face, much shorter. Its ears were shaped like a human's ears, but the eyes were small and black like a bear's. Its neck was also unhuman, thicker and shorter than any man's I've ever seen. Mr. Rowe's studied description came from his encounter in October 1955 when he climbed Mica Mountain near Jean Cache, Alberta, Canada. Cache. I read this Portuguese too, the Tete, but I don't know if I'm pronouncing it. Tete Jean Cache, Alberta, Canada. The time was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The report continued. Finally, the wild thing must have gotten my scent, for it looked directly at me through an opening in the brush. A look of amazement crossed its face. It looked so comical at the moment I had to grin. Still, in a crouched position, it backed up 3 or 4 steps, then straightened up to its full height and started to walk rapidly back the way it came. For a moment I watched over its shoulder as it went, not exactly afraid, but as though it wanted no contact with anything strange. The thought came to me that if I shot it, I would possibly have a specimen of a great interest to scientists world over. I leveled my rifle. The creature was still walking rapidly away, again turning its head in my direction. I lowered the rifle. Although I have called the creature it, I felt now that it was a human being. I know I would never forgive myself if I killed it. Just as it came to the other patch of brush, it threw its head back and made a peculiar noise that seemed to be half laugh and half language. And which I could only describe as a kind of whiny. Then it walked from a small bush into a stand of logged pole pines. In several similar stories, armed hunters have declared that they could not bring themselves to fire their weapons. The creature seemed too human to kill. It would be like shooting a man in cold blood, many have said. In an article from San Francisco Chronicle, December 7, 1965, George Draper discussed a hair-raising story which added to the evidence that the abominable snowman may sometimes hunt human beings. Mr. O.R. Edwards, owner of a lock and safe company in Fresno, California, testified that he had encountered a man-animal in the southern Saskatchewan mountains. Is that how you pronounce it? Saskatchewan mountains during World War II. I can barely read English. You gotta forgive me. You don't have to forgive me, but I appreciate you to forgive me. I saw a large man-like creature covered with brown hair. Edwards stated it was about 7 feet tall, and it was carrying in its arms what seemed like a man. I could only see legs and shoes. It was heading straight downhill to the run. I, of course, did not believe what I just seen, so I closed my eyes and shook my head to sort of clear things up. I looked down the hill again in time to see the back and shoulders and head of a man-like thing covered in brown hair. It was disappearing into brush some 70-80 yards below. Edwards also claimed that the creature emitted a damnedest whistling scream I ever heard. Draper noticed that other observers have described the man-animal's strange cry as a vibrating sound, like the sound of steam locomotive whistle or the sound of metal tearing. One witness, a geologist named R.A.E. Morley, said the animal issued a vibrating wail like a person in pain. Did Mr. Edwards actually see an ABSM kidnap a human? There are many tales of this effect. To this effect, some told by people who purportedly had been the victims of such events and had lived to tell the story. The most celebrated is the elaborately detailed narrative of elderly Canadian Mr. Albert Alsman, who claims that he was carried off by a tribe of Sasquatch in 1924, and held prisoner for several days. He describes males and females and children. It would take several pages for us to recount his whole story properly. He has repeated it in many interviews and on radio, and Ivan Sanderson gives the full details in his book. The story is so incredible that it raises an element of doubt. But then our years of experience in this field have taught us that the more bizarre the story is, the more likely it is to be true. Liars who want to be taken seriously don't try to sell absurdities. The Canadian Bigfoot surfaced in 1950s and created a sensation several years of a 7-year duration. Particularly in Northern California, close to the Oregon border. Oregon has also had its share of ABSM sightings, as has the state of Washington. Still further north, apparently the creatures have been moving up and down the western mountain ranges from Canada, and when the many sightings are laid out on a map, they seem to follow a definite mountain route. In addition to the hundreds of physical sightings, there have also been hundreds of footprints discovered throughout the region. From time to time, local authorities and Type B scientists have tried to quell the monster mania by denouncing the tracks as the work of practical jokers. This would mean that some hardy soul has gone through the trouble of constructing a special pair of giant shoes which can leave imprints so convincing that zoologists and anthropologists could be fooled by them. Said hoaxer would then have to track thousands of miles through very rugged areas, scattering his tracks in places where the chance of anyone ever finding them would be almost zero, and he would have to be very persistent, stomping up and down the mountains year after year for almost 2 decades. Bigfoot is now an integral part of California folklore, and my big brother claims that him and his wife saw it. I know when I was out there by myself one afternoon with some dogs, my brother's wife, her parents, I believe it would be, maybe mother or stepfather, I can't remember, but anyways, and this is the foothills up there, somewhere between Paradise and Chico, California, and man, I had one weird experience there too. I felt like someone was watching me, but I don't know if it was Sasquatch. I do know one thing. I ran across a guy with a freaking gun in a house in the middle of in the woods there, and there was no trail or no road, and he told me and if I didn't turn around and go back, he was going to put a bullet in me. Was it him that was watching me the whole time? I don't believe that. I think there was something else going on, but there's no way of proving it. Which, by the way, that should be a damn good story in my book. Actually, that would really be. Because that's the time, one of the first times I was outdoors, I felt freaked out being alone. Like something was watching me. Normally, I never felt that. I pretty much have been a loner my whole life. I guess I have a grazing personality, or an aloof person. I've always been a loner. Anyways, get back to this. Bigfoot is now an integral. Okay, Humboldt State College Library in Arcata, California, and Humboldt. Yeah, that's pretty close to Humboldt, where I was at too. Humboldt's more west of where I was at, but it's close. There's Butte College that's out there. It's some pretty country. It's a nice place when it's not raining, especially in the evenings and the mornings. It's a wonderful place. Yes, the Golden State. Where was that in all this? I just kind of lost track here. Complete collections of abominable snowman literature and lore. Humboldt State College Library in Arcata, California has compiled one of the world's largest, most complete collection of abominable snowman literature and lore. A man in Oakland, California, Mr. George F. has periodically publishes a newsletter, the Bigfoot Bulletin, for monster collectors. Up in Yakima, Washington, the Abominable Snowman Club of America thrives, selling photograph records of eyewitness testimony and offering an ornate membership certificate to those who wish to prove their devotion to the subject. In a number of instances, Bigfoot has displayed superhuman strength by angrily throwing heavy objects such as metal drums filled with gasoline and hurling huge tractor tires great distances, somewhat to the consternation of construction workers and lumberers in the remote Bigfoot haunts. This tire throwing feature seems to be a peculiar ABSM habit and has turned up in a number of reports. And you know what? This was it last year? Was that when I did it? When was it? When did I go there? It wasn't in the spring. Was it the spring of this year? No, it was. It must have fall last year. I was either the fall last year or spring this year when I was doing some field research, and I was noticing it had to be a little, fall, maybe November, in this area. And there's where, of course, quarry is always a big thing. And there's a quarry about a mile and a half west of here, and they have it's a fossil park where you can go there and hunt for fossils, right? And there's a path that goes around it, and it's like a sloping hill, and there's a open field to the west of it, and tree lines and all kind of stuff. Anyways, and the most peculiar and most odd place, high up in a tree that no human being could have done. I don't care how strong you were and how powerful you were, and the odds of it. There's a frickin' those pylons, orange pylons, stuck up in a giant tree. Like, and like I said, I've seen these things. I filmed them in my area, and the pylons up there in that tree. And there's a fence, and so the fence they would keep anybody from getting close to the tree. And then the other side, there's a cliff going down into where it would be the southwest corner, and going down to where the quarry where they would hunt for fossils. There's no way they could ever got there, because we're talking. I mean, it's a deep quarry, and it's easily 80 feet. At least 80 to maybe 90 feet. So the cliff on one side, and so no human being would be able to throw that orange pylon. You know, those things were into construction. In the middle, on top of a tree, and I'm just looking at that, and I'm like, how the hell did that happen? Of course, I knew how it happened. I know what happened, and I will bring it up in my book. But it's fascinating that it's like there's only two options. Somebody like in a helicopter or in a plane accidentally dropped it in that top of that tree, or something big and powerful that decided to throw it up in there just for shits and giggles. You know what I mean? And what was the pylon doing in the first place? There was no construction. It was in the middle of a place. I mean, it's just quarries and it's fields and trees and there's a path too, a worn path, and I'm pretty convinced that at certain times a year, they like to sit there on that path, that hill, and watch down to that quarry. And not only can they watch in the quarry, they also can watch anybody from a distance, like the parking lot and all that. And then the other side, there's like nothing but some like tree lines and some broken trees, like something decided to break those trees, and you know what I mean, and field, and they could just hide, and you would never be able to even find them. But there's signs of them there. And of course, I don't spend enough time on a daily basis, I haven't been there since fall last year, a year. You know what I mean? But there it was, a giant piling, one of those giant orange cones. I'm not talking about that small one. I'm talking about those bigger ones. It was like 2 foot, 2.5 foot. They're heavy. You ever try to pick one of those up? I mean, if you're a strong dude, you'd say, yeah, it's not that heavy. But the average dude, the average kid, or even a strong dude, would have a hell of a time picking that thing up and throwing it at any great distance. And this was clearly was thrown. The way it's thrown, we're talking 20, 25 feet, and just going horizontally, and then up in the tree, another, 15, 20 feet. There ain't no way in hell that anyone did that. That's one of us. I think it's one of our Bigfoot friends. Sasquatch. That was like fascinating. I got a lot of stories to tell. And what's really bizarre is I can prove that you can have these interactions. Well, I don't know if I can prove it, but I can share my stories with you, and you can prove it for yourself. That you have interaction with Sasquatch in the middle of your frickin' town, in areas where you're not supposed to have it. Where I live, there ain't no reports of Sasquatch. The only person I know who's even seen Sasquatch in my area is me. But the way the tale is told, they have to be places that's super sparsely populated by human beings, out in the dense forest or in the great wilderness. And it turns out they're like living. The night is theirs; it's not ours. And there's huge areas, suburban sprawl and parks, and especially those areas that border like farmland and wilderness, all that. They come right into our communities. The first encounter I ever had was freaking in the middle of a friggin' cemetery in the middle of my town. I'll never forget it. I got 15 feet in front of me, one of them, and there were two of them there. And the spot that, it was a pretty logical spot where they're at, for a lot of good reasons. And you know what? With the high grass sources and this deep ravine, and it wasn't a deep ravine, but it was a decent sized ravine. People wouldn't even know they were even there, and they'd be watching people and watching them from looking at their back door, and I just like none of it. Listen, it's like Keel and everyone else says or has any experience. It's very Fortean, and it doesn't add up. These things are not wild animals, and the First Nation people, I think they're right. And those who say that we're dealing with something, a type of people. And this is the reason why a lot of hunters have a time, when they see them. First of all, you see one face to face. I mean, and the eyes, the gray and dark. At least the ones I've seen. Like it was said earlier, like there was no life in it. It was lifeless, soulless, like. But then again, it's easy to say that because we're not them, right? Anyways, it's long. Let's get back into this. I find this fascinating, this whole thing about Sasquatch and UFOs, and it's what it says to us. I mean, and then there's so many other entities. I'm telling you, when you start learning how to take film stills of the edge of the forest in certain places, you're going to find elementals and all sorts of strange critters and things, and you're just like, no one's either people don't know either nobody knows what's going on, or the people that do know what's going on they're not telling us, or you have to be in the right club to find out, and you never know because people always want to take advantage of you. I want to write my books so I encourage other people. That's what I'm hoping is it sparks other people their interest and not to be afraid and research these things more. And yeah, there's a lot of weird looking, monstrous looking things, as we call it, thanks to Hollywood and other people. But just because they don't look normal or looks right doesn't mean that they're not part of the Creator's creation. And you can think of whatever you want about that one. I don't really care because I don't care if you believe in God or not. Because when I say it, I'm more in line with the First Nation people when they talk about that. But that's my own opinion. It doesn't mean anything. The fact of the matter is, this creation is so much more diverse than we realize. This world, this realm, and the parallel realms around us, the dimensions, and how do they come in and out? And they talk about portals and all that kind of stuff. I think it's more than just pseudoscience or cryptozoology or all this. I think this is a very important aspect of our reality that could translate into many different things, like free energy for once, and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not saying that knowing that Bigfoot exists means that they're going to have that, but understanding the dynamics. How did the Bigfoot freaking go? I'm telling you, the thing was massive, and it went through his fallen tree. It went right. The branches should have broken. They didn't break. The leaves should have rustled, but they didn't rustle. If you had jumped over it, because they're extremely freaking fast, there should have been a thump or something. There was nothing. It was on one side of the ravine, and the other side is fallen tree, and next thing is freaking crawling up the ravine and got 15 feet in front of me. And I don't expect you to believe me. But you know what? I'm not going to lie to you about it. I'm not going to get anywhere. I'm not making friends by telling this story. No one believes me. But that's what happened. And I hear over and over again, slowly one more story after another about very similar things about they popping out of trees and they materializing right before your eyes and all this kind of stuff. It's much more complicated than I think we even understand or want to admit. Or maybe there are people that actually do know what's going on, who do have the resources and are just keeping to themselves because there's a potential technology for them to learn from and gain from it. So they be one more step ahead of the rest of us. But, metal drums, that pine line, the pine cone, the pine line, it was huge. It was heavy. I know I couldn't have thrown it that far up in that tree. I would have to take me 100 tries, and by the time I was done, I would also have it at probably 100 different of these orange pylons. What do they call the damn things? Pylons, or pine cones, or whatever they call them. I can't even think now. I would have to have 100 of them. By I was done, there'd be 100 of them in the bottom of that quarry. That's what I think I would have accomplished. And somehow that thing is in the middle and top of that freaking tree. And no wind could have done it. And I don't care how tough or strong of a dude you are. You could have been yourself 6'8" and could bench press 500 pounds. And you wouldn't be able, and you could be the best shot putter, and there ain't a million years you would have been able to get that thing and land it on the first try. Like I said, you would as well end up, making a giant mess in the bottom of the quarry. That's all you would have done. Of orange street cones. Just. Sorry, that paragraph that just triggered that. And it's like, yeah, I got to write about that because it's just one of those things, you know what I mean? And it's to help people to recognize that something's going on when you see the tree breaks and the tree twists and the snaps and X structures. And although I don't know anybody who's actually seen Sasquatch make these tree structures, many of us believe that there's some kind of connection with them. Or at least the things that are with them, or the other things. I know there's other things in the edge of the woods and in the woods. My camera's revealing that. And it's not pareidolia. You can't call it pareidolia when the thing's sticking out of the frickin' tree. No. It's not some, bark or some nubs in the tree or somebody decided to mess around with it and create a little face. You know what I mean? Or this little freaking heads popping out of trees. And now the grass and other things. That's just the way it is. You gotta have to have a decent enough camera, and I don't know why some of us can film it and others. I think the part of the reason is because people don't film it. Even the people that are out there and they're making their videos, and I'm not knocking them because some of them are my beloved friends, and I'm just like, you need to take stills. These things move so freaking fast. And the problem is, it's almost like they're able to get you to end up looking the wrong direction. They pay attention to your eyes. You do need to film to the side and behind you and all that. I discovered that and then find out a few months later that Scott Carpenter is doing the same damn thing. I don't know, man. Anybody can shut up. I'm just saying. Tire throwing fears. This tire throwing feature seems to be a peculiar, abominable snowman habit and has turned up in a number of reports. On the other hand, part of their testimonial evidence suggests that the ABSM is abysmally stupid. Other animals, more animal than human. They do some things that don't make any sense to us. Almost slightly aggressive and illogical, but irrational. But that's part of this gig here. Some have been tempted to jump to the conclusion that he has big feet and small brain. Yet there are contradictory reports which indicate that the animal is keenly alert, even sensitive, and is able to easily outsmart and elude his pursuers. Perhaps we are trying to cope with several entirely different animals. The 10-foot giants may have only a tenuous relationship to the smaller ABSMs. Some may be more human than animal, and vice versa. That's right. And some may be about another phenomenon altogether. That's right. More psychic and hallucinatory than real. We will deal with that aspect further on. There is now substantial physical evidence proving the existence of genuine man-like animals. First of all, we have plaster casts of giant footprints collected from many continents, from the remote borderlands of Tibet to the pastoral hills of Indiana. Many of these casts match. Scientists have spun fanciful theories about the Earth's ancient past from a single piece of bone or a single fossil fragment. The ABSM evidence is far more substantial than the fragmentary evidence which has been accepted as support for many anthropological theories. Second, unique animal droppings have been found in many of the monster sites and analyzed by qualified men. These materials indicate that the animals are vegetarian in some areas and live on small rodents and wildlife and others. There is now enough of this evidence so that we can reach some general scientific conclusions. If only we could collect the material together in a single place for... It ain't gonna happen. Comparative studies. I mean, it could happen, but you're gonna have to forget about... Here's the problem. That's how the network. And as long as you have the infiltrators involved in all this, the usurpers are going to have problems. My impression at this point is humanity has been at war with Esau, Bigfoot, and Sasquatch for thousands of years, and we've done a pretty good damn job of isolating or eliminating large numbers of it. And there's not much you can do about it except the fact that that's what's going on. Third, we now have photographic evidence of a higher order. Motion pictures have been made of one of the creatures. First alleged abominable snowman photo is admittedly very flimsy. It was published in San Francisco Chronicle on December 7, 1965, and depicts a black hominoid-like figure between some trees. The figure is quite indistinct, and the story behind the photo is even more vague. It seems that the man identifying himself as Zach Hamilton dropped off a film for developing at the Brooks Camera Store in San Francisco around 1960. He told the manager, Dick Russell, an eerie tale about being stalked by a hairy monster in central Oregon, and he said that he had taken some pictures of it. Hamilton never returned for his finished photos, and Mr. Russell, when he first examined them, said, "I got prickly all over when I realized they were the pictures the old-timer said he had taken in the brush. I never saw anything like them." Russell filed them away and forgot about them until he read some of the Chronicle's Bigfoot stories. About all he could say about the photo is that the figure doesn't look broad, much broader than a man, and it doesn't appear to be walking like a bear or any other known animal. The motion picture is another story. It created quite a sensation in 1968, and it has been carefully studied by a variety of scientists and government officials. Some believe it is absolutely authentic. Others are bewildered and dubious. We have it on good authority that the man who took it has not made a nickel on it. He has, in fact, been denounced as a hoaxer in some Type B circles. If the film has been taken by a vacationing school teacher, a minister, or even a teenage hunter, it might have had somewhat more impact. Unfortunately, it was taken by one of America's leading monster hunters and ABSM authority, Mr. Roger Patterson. Mr. Patterson was first attracted to this subject in 1959 when he read an article by Ivan T. Sanderson. He began making field investigations in his home state of Washington and interviewing witnesses who had, once you have these encounters and you start to get in this, it really does take over. And there's not much you can fight it. I do fight it, and I fight it quite a bit because I know if I don't, I'll be focusing this on, like so many other people, 24/7. And that's one of the aspects of this whole thing. And it's irrational, and people know better. We do know better, but we keep doing it. Anyways. In October 20, 1967, Patterson and Bob Gimlin, were exploring the Bigfoot country northwest of Eureka, California on horseback. They rounded a bend and came up upon a small creek. On the other side, about 100 feet away, there stood a huge furry creature. At first they thought it was a bear, but then it stood upright and started to walk away. The horses became terrified and threw them. Patterson managed to grab his loaded movie camera, and he ran after the animal, which is amazing. Most people would run the other direction. He ran, but you gotta do it. It was a female. He excitedly cranked off several feet of film while she strolled into a brush and disappeared. She was about 7 feet tall and from examinations of her tracks later, we estimate her to weigh in the neighborhood of 300 pounds. Patterson, I believe it's got to be more than that. She looks like a hell of a lot more than that. Patterson said she was covered with short, shiny black hair, even on her big, droopy breasts. She seemed to have a short, sort of peak on the back of her head, but whether this was more hair or not, I don't know. And it seems to be she had a ponytail. It looks like. Anyway, the hair came right down her forehead to meet her eyebrows. If she had any, it came up to just under her cheekbones, and she had no neck. What I mean is that the bottom of her head just seemed too broad, to broaden out onto her big muscular shoulders. She walked like a big man in a hurry. The soles of her feet were definitely light in color. Among those who viewed the film was Dr. John R. Napier, director of primate biology at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. He later stated, "I observed nothing that, on scientific grounds, would point conclusively to a hoax. I am satisfied that the walk of the creature shown in the in the film was consistent with bipedal striding gait of a man. The bodily proportions of the creature, as far as could be seen, appeared to be within the normal limits for man. The appearance of the high crest on the top of the skull is unknown, but given a creature as heavily built as the subject, such a biochemical adaptation to an exclusively fibrous raw vegetable diet is not impossible." But Roger Patterson had not solved the mystery. He had only compounded it. Now we had a seemingly authentic movie of a ABSM female, and we needed to clinch our case with a body of one of the creatures. The final amazing chapter of this epic was written in December 1968 when a body turned up and was examined by Ivan Sanderson and Dr. Bernard Hovelmans, the great European authority. This should have settled the matter once and for all, but it didn't. The discovery was given a big play in the press, but when reporters went to view the remains, they discovered only a wax replica. So news stories were published denouncing the whole affair as a hoax. Could two experienced authorities like Sanderson and Havelmans have made such a mistake? On May 3rd, 1967, the Corpus Delicti went on exhibit in a refrigerated van attached to a traveling show in the Midwest. Thousands of people paid 35 cents for the privilege of trooping through the van to that season and the next. The barkers outside made no effort to identify the creature, merely classifying it as another of nature's mysteries. The body was deeply entombed in a huge cake of ice with soft lights focused on it. People entered the van not knowing they were going to see what they were going to see and left not knowing what they had seen. Finally, a herpetologist from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Mr. Terry Cullen, paid his 35 cents and wandered into the exhibit, then rushed to a telephone to call Ivan T. Sanderson. long distance. Sanderson, long hardened from constant exposure to hoaxes and the almost endless nonsense that revolved around the study of monsters, was wary at first, but Collins' credentials was respectable, and his description of the frozen animal was detailed enough to excite his interest. In December 1968, Sanderson and Havelmans descended upon the little village of Rolling Stone, Minnesota, where the refrigerated van was kept during the winter under the care of Frank Hansen. The scientists worked methodically in the freezing cold, setting up lights and cameras to photo the cake of ice from all angles, making careful measurements and drawings. They knew that if they tried to free the body from the ice, the decay would be accelerated, and the specimen would be quickly reduced to a heap of bone and rotting flesh. It was shaped like an adult human male, 6 feet tall and covered with dark brown hair, 3 to 4 inches long. Visible portions of the skin were a pale white. The hands were almost human except for the thumbs, which were excessively long. The feet measured 8 inches wide across the toes. The little toes were almost as big as the others. So the little toes were almost as big as the others. The thick hair covered the feet. The hands and feet were more human than ape-like, the scientists noted. The left arm was twisted awkwardly upward and was visibly fractured midway because of the wrist and elbows, giving the appearance of sawdust doll. The right arm was twisted also, with the open palms spread flat against the abdomen. Somebody had apparently shot it in the right eye, and the eye was dangling out of the socket. It also seemed to have been shot in the chest, and Havelmans speculated the creature may have been hit in the left arm when it attempted to defend itself. Its face had a large pug nose, more like that of a Pekingese, I can't say the damn word, Pekingese dog, than a gorilla, with large circular nostrils. Pekingese dog, I'm not saying it right. The large circular nostrils pointing straight forward. The mouth was wide with no visible lips, and some small teeth were exposed. These were in no way similar to the teeth of chimps or gorillas. To me, at least, the most interesting features of all are some folds and wrinkled lines around the mouth, just below the cheeks. Sanderson wrote in Argosy, May 1969, "These are absolutely human and not like those seen in heavily jowled or older white men. The neck was short. It hardly was a neck at all. The face and forehead were hairless." Sanderson was in the opinion that the being had been killed somewhere on North American continent very recently. Another member of the team, geologist Jack Ulrich, concurred. "It can be stated categorically that the corpse is only a few years old," he said. Dr. Havelmans prepared a scientific paper on the find and comparing the corpse with the known characteristics of the suddenly extinct Neanderthal man. He gave the creature a scientific label, Homo pongoides, ape-like man. What happened next is best told by Ivan Sanderson's own words. It is a statement published in Pursuit, January 1969, the journal he edits. Mr. Hansen told us that he was not the owner, that he did not know what the thing was, and that he did not want to know, as it was better exhibit for fairs and midways than when advertised as a mystery. Later he told us that he had been led to it in a deep freezer plant in Hong Kong and had subsequently bought it on the request of the owner. He refused to say who the person was or how the object was imported into their country. He further told us that said owner had had a copy made in Hollywood by a professional model maker for filmmakers and wax museums, just in case something like this happened. This was the possibility that a scientist of Havelman's stature, who happens to have spent over 20 years investigating the possibility of such an ultra-primate hominid still existing, examining it, and then publishing a scientific paper on it, which he did in the Bulletin of the Royal Institute of Natural Sciences in Belgium in February of this year. As a result of this publication, the WordPress became alerted, and many scientists, and notably the Smithsonian Institute, became interested, and the latter formally requested permission to inspect an X-ray specimen. This request was flatly refused by Mr. Hansen in a letter in which he also stated that the specimen which we have inspected had been removed by the owner and would never again be exhibited, while a man-made copy was being prepared for the coming show season. Why such was needed when a copy was allegedly already on hand is not clear. However, the Smithsonian was led to a professional model maker who stated that he had made just such a copy in April 1967. Meantime, we had traced another professional model maker who stated just as categorically. For the record, he had made another in April of this year. Both parties asked that their names not be divulged, but our man did say that he had been so requested by Frank Hansen. Hansen then turned up with a new model on exhibit in St. Paul, Minnesota, with a new truck containing something of ice. This, however, did not resemble the thing we saw, and in 5 essential points, further new signs on the trailer called the exhibit Skibber's Skibber's Koya creature, man-made illusion, and it had a large notice saying as investigated by the FBI. Incidentally, the FBI didn't investigate this matter since, as they stated officially to the Smithsonian, they had no grounds for doing so. In view of these facts, the Smithsonian decided to drop the matter, and in this we heartily concurred, because there would be no use in examining a wax or latex rubber model clothed in bear fur and stuffed with sawdust. However, there are a number of points left up in the air, and we can almost guarantee that you have not heard the last of this case by a long shot. I don't know. I don't know if that's been the case. So, if I'm not mistaken. So the find of the century turns into a hoax of the decade. What happened to the specimen? Dr. Hovelsman and Ivan Sanderson are recently examined, and why would the mysterious owner go through the trouble and expense of constructing 2, possibly even 3 fake models? Such models do not come cheap. We will have to sell a lot of 35-cent tickets to recover. He will have to sell a lot of 35-cent tickets to recover his investment. If the original body was real, who shot it and where? This promising bit of physical evidence collapsed before our eyes, but we still have another kind of solid evidence: the corroborative testimony of hundreds of witnesses from all over the world. There may be no ABSM encased in a block of ice in Minnesota, but there seems to be plenty of live specimens dashing about all over the world. Creatures from the Black Lagoon. A hunter is splashing alone through a swamp. Suddenly his dog begins to howl, flips his tail between his legs, and runs off. The brush ahead of the startled hunter stirs, and a great hoary shadow rises up, uttering an unearthly screech. It towers above him by 2 or 3 feet. He is too surprised and too paralyzed with fear to raise his rifle. The thing shuffles off into the blackness of the swamp. This drama has been acted so many times over the years that the basic job of simply cataloging such incidents is almost impossible. A swamp creature is not necessarily a special breed of monster, though. In most cases, its descriptions are very similar to our mountaineering abominable snowman. We shall call him Abominable Swamp Slob, ASS for short. While the ABSM thrives in forests and high places, the ASS prefers low-level marshes and bayous. There's hardly a respectable swamp in the deep south that does not boast of at least one ass. As usual, our local historical experts and the Indians have many legends and stories about the swamp creatures. It would seem that all wet, dark, and forbidding places are inhabited with unspeakable monsters of some sort. Frequently, our swamp slobs blunder onto highways, dripping with water and an ungodly stench, and try to flag down passing motorists. Perhaps one of these slobs served as the original inspiration for the popular horror movie of some years ago, The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Swamps have also provided a strange attraction for flying saucers. There have been some spectacular sightings in and around swamps in recent years. The ABSM episodes discussed in the previous chapters may appear to have little no relationship to identified flying objects, but as we move along, you may receive some rude shocks. UFOs have a habit of chasing automobiles like naughty puppies. So do our hairy humanoids. UFOs like to sneak up on and scare lovers parked in isolated places. So do our ABSMs and our asses. UFOs seem to be able to cause power failures. And once again, asses stand for abominable swamp slob. Ass. UFOs seem to be able to cause power failures, automobile stallings, and radio interference. So incredibly do our smelly freaks. On Sunday evening, May 18, 1969, the light went out in a small area outside of Rising Sun, Indiana, Ohio County. The house of Mr. and Mrs. Lester Kaiser was without power for 2 hours. They thought nothing of the incident at the time, although strange lights and weird flying objects had occasionally been sighted along a nearby ridge. At 7:30 p.m. on the following evening, May 19th, young George Kaiser was walking towards a tractor on a farm when his dog began to growl and bark. He looked up and saw a grotesque figure standing about 25 feet away. Whatever it was the size of a man and covered with black fur. I watched for about 2 minutes before I saw me, young Kaiser told investigator Bonnie Roman. It stood in a fairly upright position, although it was bent over about in the middle of its back, with arms about the same length as a normal human being. I'd say it was about 5 feet, 7 or 8, and in between there, it had a very muscular structure. Head sat directly on the shoulders, and the face was dark black, with hair which stuck out on the back of its head. Had eyes set close together and a very short forehead. It was all covered with hair except for the back of the hands and face. The hands looked like normal hands, not claws. George was transfixed with shock and fright for a moment. Then he made a move to get into his family's automobile parked nearby. The creature made a strange grunting sound, turned and jumped over a ditch and ran down the road at high speed, quickly disappearing out of sight. Footprints were found in the dirt by the ditch. They showed 3 toes plus a big toe. Plaster casts were later made of these prints. A neighbor of Kaiser, Mr. Charles Rolfing, reportedly watched an unidentified flying object about 8 minutes for about 8 minutes shortly after 10:15 p.m. on May 20th. He studied it through binoculars and described it as being a glowing greenish white. Being a glowing greenish white. Okay, that's supposed to be colorless. So here we have a sequence of interesting coincidences. A local power failure on May 18th, a creature sighting on May 19th, and a UFO sighting on May 20th. As Ian Fleming's Goldfinger remarked, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is enemy action. If you read the rest of this book carefully, you will become aware of many surprising coincidences. As they mount up, they become correlations. The correlations in turn mount up to become evidence. The only way to feed you all the evidence is to bury you in the data. We intend to give you enough data so that you may draw your own conclusions. Imagine that you are sitting on a jury and we are lawyers parading our witnesses before you. Type B scientists, the villains of this book, have a pat explanation for each type of anomalous occurrence. Their standard answer to the local United States ABSM sightings is that an ape or gorilla has escaped from a zoo or circus. They have wheeled this one out in scores of events, and despite the fact that energetic reporters and police carefully checked all known zoos and circuses, and always learned that no such escapees was at large. But if a group of people should see a hairy humanoid near your hometown tomorrow, you can almost be certain that the next day some college professor or self-styled expert will sagely announce that obviously a gorilla has escaped from the zoo, even if there is no zoo in your area, or if there is, it has never had a resident gorilla. As we stated earlier, real experts have estimated that the entire gorilla population worldwide, including those in zoos, is 400. Now this is 50 years ago. God knows not what it is now. The Type B scientists have got them outnumbered. Is this 50 years ago? Or I don't know when this was written. I can't remember. It was at least, I think it said at least 50 years ago. We'll go with that. Half a century, give or take. Back in 1931, an escaped ape obviously was running around Long Island, only a few minutes from New York City. In June that year, half a dozen persons at Lewis and Valentine's nursery near Manila, I'm assuming it's Mineola, or Mineola. I'm going to call it Mineola, Long Island, excitedly reported the sudden appearance and disappearance of a fleet-footed ape-like animal, hairy creature, about 4 feet tall. A monster mania struck Long Island. Police received so many alarmed calls that the Nassau County Police Department set out ape hunting details armed with shotguns. No circus was in town. A head count was taken of the gorillas in the nearest zoo. Nobody was missing. Still, the hairy little fellow kept pouncing out of bushes and scaring Long Islanders half to death. On June 29, Captain Earl Comstock organized a dozen heavily armed police patrols. They were joined by 20 hardy citizens armed with pitchforks and other weapons. The 4-foot-tall hairy thing must have seen the mob coming, and all monsters busters found were a lot of footprints. And all the monster busters found footprints. The prints seemed to be solely those of the hind feet and were about the size and shape of a human's hand. Though the thumbs was set further back than would be the case of a man's hand. Just to keep the police on their toes, Mrs. E.H. Tandy of Malvern, Long Island, reported seeing a lion in her backyard. It took the police 3 hours to locate a lion gun, so by the time they reached the Tandys, the animal had ambled off, never to be seen again. The ape's final appearance were in the middle of July. A nurseryman named Stockman reported that his family had seen a gorilla thrashing about in the shrubbery near Huntington. Soon afterwards, a farmer 3 miles away called in to report seeing things. Police found tracks at both places and tried to follow them, losing the trail in the nearby woods. That was supposedly the end of the Long Island ape. Or was it? In this particular section of Long Island, with Huntington in north and Minola in the east and Babylon in the south, constitutes a very interesting UFO window. We have spent many days there in the past 3 years, talking to flying saucer witnesses and collecting some very odd information. There have been numerous monster sightings in a rather desolate, hilly and wooded section south of Huntington since 1966. There's that year again. Nectar's Park in an area known appropriately enough as Mount Misery, claimed to have been terrified. What did I say? Nectar. Oh, Neckers. That's he sort of saying, like couples making out. Okay, Neckers parked in an area appropriately known as Mount Misery, claimed to have been terrified by a giant 7-foot human-shaped something. It turns up periodically in a place where many low-flying, glowing, and saucer-shaped and cigar-shaped objects have been seen. The leading expert in Mount Misery is a young lady named J.P. Parot. Miss Parot is a reporter and radio broadcaster and has been studying the history of the area for years. She has made efficient and responsible investigations into many of the UFO and creature sightings, and in January 1969 she succeeded in photographing a very unusual being in the secluded woods on the top of the mountain. Fortunately, she had a witness with her, and he signed the following statement. Oh, I'd like to see that image. Wouldn't you? I like looking at people's images. 8 a.m. on Sunday, January 2, 1969, I drove with J. P. Parot and Barbara LaMonica of Huntington, New York, to the area of Mount Misery for the purpose of taking photos of the landscape. We pulled our car into a particular clearing on the left side of Mount Misery Road, then decided to continue on foot. We decided to photograph. We decided to photograph on an area which was located about 500 feet from our car. Jay was ready to take her first shot when through the corner of my eye I caught the glimpse of a moving black object. Knowing we were completely alone in this desolate area, we were very scared. Immediately, Jay turned and snapped the first two pictures. The three of us were horrified to see the figure of something that resembled a human, disfigured face, long wild black hair, and dressed in a long black garment. It retreated immediately further into the bushes and made no sounds and made no attempt to communicate with us. Frozen in her tracks, Jay dropped her camera. I picked it up and shot the two remaining pictures. Barbara started to run to the car, and Jay and I followed, and we took off in a cloud of dust. What was it? A practical joker lying in wait on a bitter cold Sunday at 8 a.m.? Not very likely. A hermit? There are no rumors of a hermit living around Mount Misery. Photo depicts a dark blob with a very bushy head of hair and extending a pale, long-fingered hand. This picture was published in Beyond magazine, July 1969, together with an article by Miss Parot on other unusual incidences around Mount Misery. The residents around Mount Misery are mostly estates owned by officials from the United Nations and by other dignitaries. The late Henry L. Stimson, Secretary of War during World War II, maintained a mansion on the very summit of the mount. To demonstrate our theory that these events tend to reoccur in the same window areas year after year and even century after century, we will present a catalog of monster sightings summarizing many of the major and minor incidences in the past few years. This material has been collected from many sources, including the files of Ivan T. Sanderson, Roger Patterson, Loren Coleman, Fate magazine, and of course our own swelling files. We have organized this material by states to give you some idea of the geographical dispersion of these reports. Then we will follow with a chart outlining the significant correlations found in many of these reports. We have not tampered with these stories in any way. We present the facts as originally reported. We have, of course, greatly condensed each item. Some of these reports cover many pages. Some have included photographs, plaster casts, and lengthy tape recordings of the witnesses. Others are based upon lengthy newspaper stories written and published by competent local reporters. Devout monster collectors will recognize some of these items. Some may complain because we have found it necessary to be so terse. This catalog is by no means complete. We have not, for example, attempted to present even a fraction of the California Bigfoot sightings, and we have weeded out hundreds of sightings involving only the discovery of inexplicable giant footprints. We have also omitted and tried to omit the many unconfirmed or hearsay reports which flood our mail, but a few have been included and properly identified as such. As any statistician will tell you, a sampling must be random if any valid conclusions are to be reached. Alabama. 1. A booger, as the locals call it, created quite a stir around Clanton, Alabama. In the fall of 1960, several witnesses reported seeing a tall, hairy creature around Walnut Creek. A posse was formed and found footprints which resembled those of a giant ape. Shortly after the posse quit the chase, and Reverend E.C. Hand saw the monster near Liberty Hill, grabbed his shotgun and pursued it, but it was gone away. I can make my dog catch a mule, Reverend Hand said, but I could not get them. I said dogs, okay. I can make my dogs catch a mule, Reverend Hand said, but I could not get them to venture out towards the booger. As time passed, there were more reports. Some witnesses claimed the animal made a sound like a woman screaming. Others said it sounded more like an elephant. It also prowled peach orchards and apparently sampling peaches. 5 years later, on August 30th, 1965, the Union banner at Clanton carried this illuminating story. Quote, some 6 years ago, several people out of Walnut Creek, a mile or so from Clanton, that's how it's Clanton, reported, and I guess if I've been saying it wrong, so it's Clanton, or Ton, reported seeing some animal like a bear. It made some curious sounds at night, kindly, like a woman in distress. It ranged up and down the creek for a distance of some 10 miles. Then some 4 years ago, something made tracks in peach orchards some 3 miles south of Clanton, near large swamps. It was supposed to vanish into the swamps at night. A cement cast was made of the track, about the size of a person's foot, but looking more like a hand. The cast is still somewhere in Clanton, and this is interesting because if you look at the mural of for the Vatican, they depict that in their mural, that exact same thing. Let's see if I can find this real fast and blunder through this, and maybe I might have some luck. I got so many images. I'm trying to consolidate some of my images that I've taken myself. I can't remember the name of it. Last something. Anyways, there it is. Then the bottom of the center of that mural is in the freaking middle of the Vatican, right there, which they're just describing a booger. And this ancient old, I don't know how you could call it ancient, but it's, I can't even remember how, I've got to look it up. I'll look it up again. But not right now. Or you can look it up. But anyways, there it is. That thing that they're talking about, that thing, is that right there. And they know about it. It's right in the middle and right before our eyes. Now, it's supposed to be the guardians of the underworld. Hell. The problem is Dante's Infernal is not necessarily the same thing as what we're talking about here. Then everybody seems so miserable, and it's almost like it's just human beings that are transmogrified or formed or whatever. And then you can see that what's there, that, right? And that foot right next to him too with the claws. So these things they've known about for a long time and have been part of our history, the European folklore as well, and people have, having issues with them, and clearly religious organizations like the Catholic Church and Christianity and it's just you can blame them, but the problem is everybody takes advantage of this shit for one way or another. So it doesn't and that's to give any kind of free pass for Catholic Church, but you know what I'm saying, or Christianity, or. But it's interesting that I wonder how much is it that that book of black spells called the Bible is involved with all this too. I'm just saying. I know it's offensive what I just said there, but one should ask. I think. Is there a possible connection or correlation between what our belief system, what we believe in, and what we end up experiencing?
You're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you're going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind.
If you don't know, you should take it slow. Are you searching? Is it hard to find? If you're broken, running out of time, what you don't have is any peace of mind. Seasons don't change. If I can't go, will you take me there? I won't break